Okay, so I'll go ahead and reintroduce Bhante Kovida. So Bhante Kovida grew up in the tropical island of Jamaica, West Indies, and is of Chinese descent. He immigrated to Canada and did science studies. Then he traveled to India and Nepal and began to study the Indian history and culture, meditation and yoga and Buddhism. He went to Sri Lanka and did social development work on a soya food project funded by the Canadian government. He then ordained in Sri Lanka with Venerable Balagoda Ananda Maitreya Thero. I think I got that close. A noted scholar, teacher, and meditation practitioner. Since then, Bhante Kovida has been traveling and sharing the Dharma in several countries: Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Europe, and across Canada. He also teaches mindfulness meditation and Qigong, which is an effective way of dealing with stress and emotional stress, including upset, frustration, anxiety, and depression.
Thank you. Who was not here 2 weeks ago at the talk I gave? Okay. You'll be happy to know it's all on video. It's all on YouTube. If you look carefully, you can find God on YouTube too. And of course, people are still arguing about God, whether he exists or not. Before I speak about the three characteristics of existence, or the three facts of existence, I'd just like to continue briefly about one of the qualities of the Buddha. We said last week that the qualities of the Buddha, the main quality is wisdom and mindfulness, right understanding, right attitude. It goes with mindfulness, being aware, being present. And from that, his second quality was simplicity, contentment, and renunciation. And the third quality was loving kindness and compassion. We spoke about how these qualities have an interesting relationship to our mental defilements, because we all have mental defilements, because it's a part of our social conditioning. We're all conditioned with mental defilements or mental pollutions. And even Siddhartha himself, Siddhartha Gautama, before he became the Buddha, the awakened one, he also had mental defilements. You can't escape it. Because our minds, we're conditioned to react. We're always reacting. And our brains are educated, programmed to label, to judge, to criticize, to compare, to condemn, to like or not to like, to want or not to want, and to have aversion, ill will, hatred, resentment, jealousy, and so on. And we said that when we look at our mental defilements and we look at the three qualities of the Buddha, you see there's a very interesting relationship. You see that wisdom and mindfulness is the medicine, the antidote for ignorance and delusion. So wisdom, right understanding, helps us to overcome ignorance, namely our strong attachment to self, to the ego. And as you know, in this type of society, North American society, the attachment to ego is very strong. And we are brought up to identify with everything. And this is why the Dhamma is so challenging. Stop reacting and stop identifying with things. Very, very challenging, because it goes against our conditioning. And of course, we see that simplicity, contentment, and renunciation is the medicine, the antidote for craving. Craving, desire, and attachment. Our attachments are very strong. Because again, we're educated to identify with things. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And of course, we see that loving kindness and compassion is the medicine, the antidote for all our negative mental states. Aversion, hatred, ill will, jealousy, resentment, disrespect, and so on. Now, just briefly, I just want to mention the quality of renunciation. As we mentioned 2 weeks ago, that if you're brought up in a Hindu or a Buddhist culture, renunciation means becoming a monk or a nun. But as you know, not many people can become monks and nuns. Even recently, I met a young Vietnamese monk. And that's rare for, even among the Vietnamese community in Houston, for a young person to become a monk. But he was inspired to become a monk simply because his father had passed away. And that really woke him up to the truth of impermanence. So as we said, renunciation is much more than becoming a monk or a nun. As I mentioned during my travels, I have met monks and nuns who still have a lot of craving, a lot of attachments. So the real renunciation is in the mind. So we can still practice the spirit of renunciation in our modern, consumer, materialistic society. And really, it's really learning how to let go of things. And as you know, you've heard this before, learning how to let go. Now, what the Dhamma is teaching us is that as human beings, we have the unfortunate habit of identifying with things, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, because whatever we identify with is subject to change. It's not permanent. Whether it's physical, your own body, of course, other people, family, friends, and so on, including people you don't like, not only close friends. While our emotions or mental states are also impermanent. And there's a basic reason for this. I'll go into this after, of the truth of impermanence. So mindfulness, present moment awareness, is what gives us the ability to see things objectively and let them go. This is the miracle of mindfulness. Simply because it's a state of non-duality. So we're able to see something as it is. Now, what does that mean? Mindfulness is a state of non-duality. It means that actually there's no I, no me, who's actually being mindful or being aware. Now, initially we don't see this because we're always identifying with everything. In other words, awareness, mindfulness, is that state of attention. And when we practice, we can see that. But when we have the habit of identifying with things, then we create duality. Duality means subject and object. And the conditioning of duality starts very early. Again, the moment a child is learning to speak, or starts to speak, and a child says, I like this, I don't like that. I want this, I don't want that. That is already the beginning of duality. Meaning, subject and object. And the I is always the subject. Do you see that? So it starts with language, very innocently. So this is why we're conditioned with this duality of subject and object. And this duality gets more deep-rooted in the mind when we start to identify with our sense experiences, because that's a part of consciousness. Consciousness is much more than awareness. And this is something the Buddha realized. Consciousness is related to seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Because as you know, the Buddha added the mind as the sixth sense. When we say, I am seeing something, when I'm hearing something, I'm smelling something, I'm tasting something, I'm feeling something by touch, and of course I'm thinking something. You see the duality, subject and object. And here is something that is so profound. And only the Buddha, someone like the Buddha, saw this initially. And this was one of his insights. He saw actually that our senses are actually sensing by themselves. There's really no one behind it. But when we say, I am seeing something, and of course, I like it, I don't like it, it's an apple tree or an orange tree, we create a duality, right? We create a duality between a seer, an observer, that feels that it's separate from the object. Do you see that? This is very profound. Just like hearing. Hearing is automatic, isn't it? As long as your ears are healthy, you don't have to make a special effort to hear the speaker. It just happens. Let's do a quick experiment. Close your eyes for a moment. Just close your eyes for a moment. Okay? Open your eyes. Close your eyes one more time. Open your eyes. What do you see? What do you realize? That seeing, as long as your eyes are healthy, all you have to do is open your eyes and seeing happens, seeing consciousness. You see that? It's just happening by itself, just like hearing. Just like when you start eating, tasting arises automatically. And if you're not sure about this, when you have lunch, say to yourself, okay, I'm going to eat this thing, and I'm going to try not to taste it, see what happens. You can't avoid tasting. As long as you have, taste buds on your tongue, tasting consciousness will arise. And this is one of the insights of the Buddha. But because we have that habit of identifying with our sense experiences, we create that illusion of a duality, including a smeller separate from smells or odors, a feeler separate from touch sensation, and we believe that there's a thinker separate from thoughts. When we say, I am thinking thoughts, or I'm thinking good thoughts, or I'm thinking bad thoughts, we believe that there's a thinker that is thinking thoughts, but it's an illusion. It takes insight to see this. But this was one of the insights of the Buddha. For example, just close your eyes for a moment and just think these three thoughts slowly. I am thinking. Again, I am thinking. One more time, I am thinking. You see that I is a thought, am is a thought, thinking is a thought. In other words, I am thinking are three thoughts. Do you see that? The I is not separate as the thinker. If you don't get it, that's your homework when you go home. You have the rest of your life to practice this at home. You begin to see that the I, when you say I am thinking, it's just thoughts, isn't it? That is the wonderful thing of awareness. This is awareness. Our Buddha nature can see that. I am thinking are just thoughts. And the I really is a thought. And yet we are, out of our ignorance and lack of awareness, we think this I is so important, right? The ego. To be more precise, the American ego. The American ego is so strong. My goodness. And it's an illusion, isn't it? It's an illusion. It's just a thought. But fortunately, people are waking up to this illusion that we're trapped in. And when it comes to our emotions, a happy feeling arises and we say, I am happy. Or I'm feeling happy. Sounds totally normal, isn't it? But then unhappy feeling arises, we say, I am unhappy. Or I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm afraid, I am bored, I'm lonely, etc., etc. You see the identification. Now, initially, when we say, I am happy, no problem. Why is that? Because it feels good, isn't it? It's a pleasant feeling. But when you say, I am unhappy, I'm upset, and so on, you see the suffering because it's unpleasant. And what the Dharma is showing us is that whether an emotion is pleasant or unpleasant, they are both impermanent and they don't belong to us. That is the thing. Profound insight of the Buddha. So in Dharma practice, we learn how to objectify these emotions. For example, if there's anger arising or upset, instead of saying, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, you just breathe mindfully and you say, there is upset, or there's a state of anger, there is frustration. You see the difference? Yeah. You're seeing it, there's space, there's a space there when you see something objectively, and you're not holding on to it. As my anger, my upset, my happiness, or my unhappiness. Because what happens is that when we identify with emotions, we hold on to them as something personal. And as you know, many people are chasing the elusive happiness. And frustration arises. Because initially, when we get very attached to feeling happy, feeling good, enjoying so many pleasures, it's wonderful, but eventually we experience frustration. Why is that? Because it doesn't last. A happy feeling, an enjoyment, whatever it is, pleasure, it doesn't last. But we would like it to last for as long as possible. And when we objectify an emotion, you see it as it is, you're not clinging to it, and then you remind yourself it is impermanent. That is the wisdom of the Dhamma. It's only a temporary mental state, a changing condition of the mind. Very important. And also, when you don't identify with an emotion, you don't create a conflict around the emotion. For example, when they say, oh, I am angry. And then you say, oh, this is terrible, I shouldn't be angry. I'm such a bad Buddhist, or I'm such a bad meditator. Now I'll never have enlightenment. I won't achieve enlightenment. I won't become an arahant. Or if you're a Christian, I won't become a saint. You see, you create that conflict because you have an image in your mind that, I'm a bad so-and-so, whatever it is. And the same with guilt. A lot of people suffer from guilt, right? And that's because of the judgmental mind. And this is why it's very important when we make mistakes, it's important that we forgive ourselves for being human. Because we are not perfect. No one is perfect and everyone makes mistakes, including famous monks. I'm not one of the famous monks, but there are some monks that are really famous. They make mistakes too because they're human. Welcome to the human world. Very important. Very important you forgive yourself. And of course, you try to learn from your mistakes. That's the important thing. What can I learn from this? Now, it's natural to have regrets. We can all relate to that, right? But if you keep feeling guilty, you end up torturing yourself. And guilt is related to fear. When you look at it, guilt is an aspect of fear. Because of the negativity, and you create that negative image about yourself. So it creates fear and conflict. And this is why the practice of loving kindness is so beneficial. Because when you do loving kindness, meditation, you replace those negative judgmental thoughts with kind, positive thoughts. May I be well, happy, and peaceful. May I be free from fear, conflict, and delusion. May all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May all beings be free from fear, conflict, and delusion. It's very liberating. And also with practice, we begin to see that whatever we're experiencing in the moment, especially if it's unpleasant or challenging, just remind yourself, it's only a changing condition of the mind. It will change. This too shall pass. You know, these 4 words contain the greatest wisdom in human experience. This too shall pass. And we mentioned too the freedom of not reacting so much. Because this is part of our problem. We're just so reactive. And these days, can you imagine, because of the media, you know, somebody can say something, just a few words, and thousands of people go crazy. That reaction. But the best thing you can do is just laugh. Especially if something is very irrational, just laugh at it. Don't take it seriously. Now, the basic reason why things are impermanent, things change, is simply because we're a process. Maybe you've heard this before. We're a process of body and mind, rupa and nama. If we were not a process, we wouldn't be alive. That is the point. And we take it for granted, don't we? Unless you get sick and you need medical treatment or you're in the hospital for a few days. You take it for granted. We take our health for granted, and we take the fact that we're this process. Now, initially, when we hear that we're a process, you might say, oh yeah, but the understanding is not very, it's superficial. Just like when we hear that we're composed of elements, 6 elements. It's just an idea. But we don't really understand the reality of it. And this is where mindfulness comes in. Because it's very easy to forget, to overlook the fact that we're a process. Because we are social creatures. And we use language, right? We use names, we use I, you, he, she. So we keep ignoring the fact that we're this process. With mindfulness, for example, just be aware of the breathing sensation. Feel the body breathing. That is a physical process, rupa. Right? And the awareness of the body breathing is the mind, mental process. See, that is the miracle of mindfulness. It brings us immediately to that reality. And you see it every time you sit and your mind is focused, some calmness, see that. So this was one of the practices in the forest tradition. To see this truth of process, body and mind and body in your daily activity. For example, when you're doing mindful walking, same thing. The feet moving and touching is a physical process, rupa, and the awareness of the feet moving is the mind. And I demonstrated that hand movements last week. It's easy to see this one because you're moving. The hands moving and touching the body, that is the physical process. And the awareness of the hands moving and touching is the mind. You see body and mind. You see it as a fact. And if you're eating mindfully, say if you're on a retreat, or if you're alone and you're not scrolling on your smartphone, I watch people scrolling on their smartphone while they're eating. You can see that. You know, the tasting, chewing, swallowing is a physical process. And the awareness of the tasting, chewing, swallowing is the mind. You see this fact all the time. Just mind and body. Rupa Nama. So we're all Rupa Namas here, or Nama Rupas. It's very profound, and yet it's so basic. And in that understanding, there is no man, no woman. It happens to go beyond all our social labels, including, engineer, IT specialist, wife, husband, son, daughter, doctor, lawyer, brain surgeon, you name it. And when I'm in England, I speak about this, about the royal family, the queen, king, prince, princess, aristocracy. They're all Nama, Rupa, Rupa, Nama. And they're all subject to sickness, aging, and death, regardless of their titles. Because, in Europe and England, they have a long history of titles and aristocracy and royalty. But they have to die. Look at the queen, right? 70 years, but eventually she had to pass away through the impermanence. But you see, initially, when we, on a superficial level, we can see, things change. But there are certain things we don't want to change. Have you noticed that? Including certain people. Of course, if you have a good job, you like that job to be permanent, right? Because of our personal attachments. And let's be honest, if you don't like somebody, or that somebody has been giving you a hard time, and they drop dead, they have a heart attack, good riddance. Thank God, as they say, as we say. It's a part of human nature. So we're alive because of impermanence, change, the process. And interestingly enough, the process of digestion is extremely complex. And during college, I took a half-year course in biochemistry, and that's what we learned, the digestion process. And I was so amazed of how complex it was. All the different acids and enzymes that are working to break the food down so the body can absorb nutrition and expel the rest. And unless you have serious digestion problem, you just eat and you just, go about your business or have a rest. Because the body has the intelligence to take care of this complexity. It's quite amazing. I once met a lady from Canada, and she was doing village development work in India for several years for the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation in Gujarat state. And after several years, she developed serious digestion problem, and she couldn't eat anymore. But fortunately, she was able to go to a natural cure center, which was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and his fasting. And she went on a 1-month fast. Can you imagine? I fasted for 10 days, 5 days, 10 days. It's wonderful. But 1 month was very special. And she was only allowed 1 tablespoon of water once an hour. So normally when you fast, you can drink, any amount of liquid. But in her case, she couldn't drink just glasses of water. It had to be a very small amount to give the system a complete rest. But as you know, the cells in the body, they need water. And if you've ever fasted after 2 days, the hunger goes away and you feel so calm, so wonderful. And she said after 2 weeks, she said she had never felt so good. And she felt light as if she was floating. Of course, it was carefully monitored, at the center. And she did yoga, there was, herbal massage and all that stuff. And after 2 weeks, she said she felt as if she wouldn't have to eat anymore. She felt so good. But eventually, you have to go back to eating. And after 1 month, breaking such a long fast had to be very, very gradual. So it started with very diluted juice. Even normal juice would have been too strong, too rich, very, very dilute, and then slowly to normal juice, and then, milk, yogurt, and so on. Now, the teaching of non-self anatta was so profound, so radical, and the Buddha understood how profound it was. Even most monks couldn't understand it. It took them a long time to really understand it. He tried to explain this in different ways. One way was to see body-mind process, right? The other way was to explain from the body-mind process are the 5 factors that create our daily experience. That who we are as a person, in quotation mark, are really 5 things working. There's the physical body, with all the sense organs, feeling, sensation, perception, mental reaction or mental formation, and consciousness. Now it seems very complicated, doesn't it? Because when I first read this, I thought, how is that related to our daily experience? It's too complicated for me, because I'm not a scholar. So this is why I like to give a simple example of these 5 things working, then you can relate to it. Because what is interesting is that these 5 things are working all the time in our daily life, but we're not aware of it because they happen so quickly. Now, before I give you the simple example of these 5 things working, I'd like to clarify what perception is. Because for many people, perception is a bit vague, the way we use the word perception. It can mean many things. When you say, oh, it's a matter of perception, or the way you perceive things, right? And I could explain about consciousness, because a lot of people don't understand what consciousness is, even people with PhDs. I watch some of these PhD scientists speak about the hard problem of consciousness, or the problem of consciousness, or the mystery of consciousness. And I thought these people need to do some proper meditation. Then it's very simple. And they never thought of checking out what the Buddha taught. Again, permanent head damage. That's what PhD means. It can mean that way, of course. Not all the time. Okay. Perception is the ability to recognize a sense object. A good example, you're listening to the radio, you recognize a song. And sometimes you recognize the singer, the artist. That's perception at work. Not only are you hearing the song, but you recognize the song and the singer. So in other words, perception is related to memory, to past experience. Another good example, if you go to maybe the Asian food market in the summer, or Chinatowns in San Francisco, Toronto, New York, you see some strange fruits. Some of you maybe are familiar with them, like rambutan, durian, the stinky fruit, the famous, infamous fruit, and mangosteen, monkeys. Because many white Americans or white Canadians, when they see these fruits in Chinatown, they have no idea. But if you've been to Southeast Asia, or you have friends here who introduce these fruits to you, you know immediately what these fruits are. I remember I first had a close encounter with durian, was in Sri Lanka. It wasn't very pleasant, but eventually I got to like it. So that's the nature of perception. Okay? Now, consciousness, as we said, is constantly changing, and it's much more than awareness. Because very often when we usually equate consciousness with awareness. When you say, oh, I'm conscious of something, means I'm aware of something, right? But there is awareness, and then there is a consciousness related to seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And so consciousness is constantly changing. It's not permanent. This is a very important thing to understand. It's always changing depending on our sense experience. Now, for example, I assume all of you had some breakfast, right? Or light breakfast. Now, when you had breakfast, there was some tasting, right? And maybe smelling. But at this moment, there's no tasting or smelling, right? You're seeing, you're hearing, and you can feel your body sitting, right? Now, close your eyes for a moment. There's no seeing consciousness, but there's hearing, and you feel. And you're aware of your body breathing. If you're thinking, that's a part of consciousness, but if you're not thinking, but just being mindful, there's no thinking. And then you open your eyes and you see that seeing consciousness arises again. See, that's the nature of consciousness. It always depends on your sense experience. And of course, later when we all have lunch, tasting and smelling will arise again. That's the nature of consciousness. And interestingly, tonight when we all go to bed and we're in the deep sleep state, and deep sleep usually lasts between 1 to 2 hours, depending on the individual. In deep sleep state, this is before dreaming, by the way, there is no consciousness. Houston does not exist. And Donald Trump does not exist in deep sleep state. Even if you are supporting him, he does not exist in deep sleep state. And this is why there's an old saying. So I must be really old with my old saying this. When you're in deep sleep state and you're not aware of anything, we say that person is dead to the world. Are you familiar with that saying? It's an old saying. Somebody is dead to the world, meaning you're not aware of anything. So believe it or not, we actually die in deep sleep state. We die. Once I was speaking about this in Malaysia, Singapore, and one lady got very anxious. And she said, Bhante, I don't think I'm going to go to bed tonight. I said, yeah, you still keep drinking tea and coffee. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's very peaceful. But then what is interesting is that when if we're still alive, the body, the brain comes out of the deep sleep state and the thought process starts up again. And that's what we call the dream state. We can all relate to that. And if you ever observe your dreams, or quickly write some really interesting ones down before you forget them, you see that most of our dreams are really just memories all mixed up. Have you noticed that? Including, some fantasy, sometimes anxiety will arise, sometimes a conflict will arise. If you're having conflict in your daily life, sometimes it will arise in the dream. Because thinking is related to memory. We'll speak about that. And you'll notice that if something important is coming up, some important event or an appointment or something, you'll often dream about it. Have you noticed that? And the classic one, you're taking a trip somewhere, right? And you're excited about it naturally, and you dream about it. And sometimes you dream you're desperately trying to get to the airport, but there's something, for some reason you can't get to the airport. But you finally get to the airport and you've missed your flight, right? And you wake up, oh, thank God, it's only a dream. And you have those rare dreams that something wonderful is going to happen. And you're looking forward to it. And then you wake up. Damn! I had such a dream. I had one of those rare, vivid dreams where you can create the dream as you go along. And during one of these very creative dreams, I had a strong desire for a certain type of food. I have to get this food. And I had to go through like a James Bond adventure, literally a James Bond, to get this food. And I finally get it. In my hot little hands, and I'm just about to bite into it. You can know what happened. I wake up. No, that is suffering. When I wonder what is one bite. After all that effort, Okay, so the simple example I'm going to give. You're taking a walk in the bush somewhere. Because your body is involved, your senses, and you hear a sound. You look towards the sound. Your eyes see an object. With perception, you recognize the object as snake or frogs. Do you have snakes in Texas? Okay. I had a close encounter with a cobra, but that's another story. In Sri Lanka. With perception, you recognize frog or snake. From that perception, recognition, comes your feeling, sensation. If you happen to like snakes or frogs, what kind of feeling are you going to experience? It's going to be very pleasant. Oh, wow, this is great, right? You're happy to see the frog or the snake. But if you don't like frogs or snakes, you can imagine, the opposite. Fear, aversion, anxiety, right? From that feeling sensation comes your mental reaction or mental formation. If it's a very pleasant experience, say, wow, let me stop and I watch. Because you're not afraid, right? And you might think, oh, and you like to play with it, but you don't want to touch it. So you might take a twig and just gently play with the snake or the frog. No fear, no anxiety. On the other hand, if there's fear, aversion, you can imagine what happens. You either walk very quickly away or you run, depending on how scared you are. So that's a simple example of these 5 things working to create our experience. Maybe the next time you go shopping, you can experience, but the important thing, you're very calm. Do some practice before you go shopping, maybe a holiday. And you're not in a rush. You go to a shopping center. In the summer, do you have farmers markets here? Yeah, you can go to the farmers market. Those are more interesting sometimes. And just be aware of these 5 things. Things that you see, you hear, things that you recognize or you don't recognize. Huh? And of course, your reaction would be how much you decide, what you decide to buy, and how much you decide to buy. And what the Dharma is showing us that these 5 things are, they happen very quickly, they're impermanent. And there's no permanent I behind any of this. This is what is so profound, these 5 things. And this is why it happened in that teaching of Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. The talk is on video. If you don't have the links, come and see me. I have the links here. That these 5 things are impermanent, and there's no I. There's no permanent I behind these 5 things. It's very profound. And this is why when I mentioned, if you understand that these 5 things are interdependent, interconnected, you realize that consciousness cannot continue after death. Because many Buddhists today believe that consciousness continues after death. But if you understand these 5 factors of experience, you realize consciousness, it cannot continue. Because it's impermanent and also it's interconnected. They work together. In other words, you cannot separate consciousness from the other 5 factors. It's like you cannot separate your nose from your face. But we like to believe that something continues simply because of wishful thinking. Because thinking wants to continue after death. I've always been fascinated by this and why we believe in we have so many beliefs in an afterlife. Because it's very comforting, I understand. Now, another way the Buddha tried to explain this profound teaching of no permanent separate self was to teach about the elements. Very profound, wonderful teaching. But I might not have time to do the elements. But again, it's on video. I'll give you the link. A more modern way of trying to understand the self. And J. Krishnamurti was the person who gave me this amazing insight into the nature of the thinking process. Because this was one of the questions I had when I went to India back in the 70s. What is thinking? Nobody teaches us to understand what this thinking process is. Because the more you understand it, the more you understand what this ego is, what the self is. Thinking is a response to 3 things in the mind. Memory, past experience, knowledge. You can add the word information. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. And if you observe your mind, you can see how obvious it is. It is so obvious, isn't it? Memory, right? You can see the connection. Of course, past experience is connected to memory, and all the knowledge, all the information that we have in the mind is connected to thinking. And you can say that every time we think, whether it's compulsive thinking or we're thinking rationally, practically, we keep recycling the information that's stored in the mind, in the brain. It's all recycled. And thinking has an ability to project in the future. We can all relate to that, right? We're either remembering something or you're projecting in the future. That's just the nature of thinking. Thinking is a movement in time, from past to future, past to future. And the ego, the conditioning of self or ego, is a part of that thinking process. And the Buddha had this insight, and of course, J. Krishnamurti. And a good example of this is, when we meet somebody for the first time, and we have time to chat, And we talk about ourselves. What do we talk about when we talk about ourselves? It's all personal history, isn't it? You know, where you grew up, you know, your family background, yeah, your education history, you know, elementary school, maybe kindergarten, high school, college. And if you're in the working world, you speak about your work history, right? Sometimes you speak about pleasant memories, unpleasant memories, because we all have unpleasant memories too. We speak about books we have read, movies we have seen. Now, of course, we have internet, things we have seen on YouTube. If you have traveled, you naturally speak about your travel experiences and where next you'd like to visit. You see that? It's all based on memories and personal history. So that's who we are, the conditioning. And this is why, you know, when somebody suffers from amnesia, you know, temporary memory loss, why it is so confusing, so scary, and the word disconcerting, right? Yeah. Because when you lose your memory, you don't know who you are. Do you see that? That's why it's so scary, so puzzling, so disconcerting, confusing. So you can really see that how the self is really a conditioning based on memories, personal history. Very profound insight. And of course, with that, we have our future projections, right? Plans, hopes, and dreams, and so on. That's the whole conditioning of the mind. And then the Buddha used awareness, the knowing mind, intuitive knowing, to see that. Because awareness is not conditioned, it is the unconditioned state of mind. In Zen, they call it beginner's mind or original mind. And we all have this. And it is our Buddha nature, or wisdom mind, the knowing and the awareness. But initially, we are too attached to thinking, to the thinking mind, the conditioned mind, and the I, and all our, desires and attachments and so on. That's all conditioned. Initially, we're very attached to that, and that's something the Buddha saw very clearly. The root of suffering was thinking and all the conditioning that we're trapped in, and all the drama, with the I, and all the worries, regrets, feeling guilty, all the things we've been through. So with Dharma practice, we begin to have more confidence, more trust in our Buddha nature. Present moment awareness and knowing. This knowing is different from intellectual knowing. Because as you know, intellectual knowing is based on memory, right? Memory, knowledge, information. But intuitive knowing is very different. Like when you breathe in, you know you're breathing in, right? When you breathe out, you know you're breathing out. It's something deep. It's a deeper knowing. Like when you're hungry, you know you're hungry. When you're tired, you know you're tired. When you have to go to the washroom, you know you have to go. And this is natural intelligence. And we learn to trust, put more trust in the awareness and the knowing. Yes, we need to think in daily life, but we don't have to be thinking all the time. But as you know, part of the human conditioning is that we tend to think too much, right? Even when we don't need to think, the mind just keeps, thinking blah, 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 blah. And we believe all the stories, right? All the stories, mini dramas, soap operas that the mind is creating. Because I used to believe that too. Because it's a part of our education, right? We're educated that way. We have to think. And we get trapped in thinking. And that's why we suffer from neurosis. Neurosis means that when we identify too much with thinking, we get deluded by thinking. We believe all the stories, worries, many dramas. And every time the mind says I, we think this I is who we are, right? But what is so liberating, you realize this I is not who you are. It's just a thought. And who we really are is the awareness, the knowing. And we mentioned 2 weeks ago that that image you see in the mirror is not who you are. And yet we're so attached to the image, right? And if you've noticed, when you look in the mirror, half the time you're not pleased with that image. And it's always changing. And some days you look in the mirror and say, today I'm not too bad. And it'll be, a fashion model or a beauty queen, but today I'm okay. But 2 days later, you go back and you look at me, oh my God, what happened? I look awful. But there's something to learn from that. That image is not who you are. And it's changing. And the old saying, physical beauty is only skin deep. So a very good practice, when you look in the mirror, just say to yourself, not me, not mine. Instant awakening. And 2 weeks ago, I mentioned the example that some people can relate to where, you're just not feeling well. You're either sick or you're not in a good mood. And you happen to meet a friend, and the friend says, oh, you're looking so nice today. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? You see? Because what you're experiencing has nothing to do with that image that your friend is seeing. Also, here's another interesting thing. You look around this room, you can see all the faces in this room, right? Just look around for a moment. But there's one face you cannot see. Right? Exactly. And yet, you're alive. You're aware, you can understand, you can perceive things. Once I had a very good experience. I was up in northern India for 2 consecutive summers many years ago. I was a practicing yogi, a Dhamma, but I wasn't a monk at the time. It was wonderful. And I was living in very simple places, but incredible sceneries, mountains and Himalayas up in the north and rivers and pine trees up in northern India. And there was no mirror around. And I would go for several weeks without looking in a mirror. So I had no idea what, this image looked like. It was very liberating. Because when you're not going by that image, you experience things in a very deep way. The awareness deepens, the intuitive intelligence goes very deep. And I remember going into town, maybe getting my head shaved or something. And then suddenly you see this image in the mirror, at the barber shop. And I think, oh my God, who's that? Total stranger. Very interesting. So really, it's the self or the ego is not really a problem. If we understand it's just part of our condition, but is there a strong attachment to it? That is the cause of suffering. When we take ourselves too seriously, we have more fear, more insecurity, more craving, more greed, more frustration. That is the problem. It's a strong attachment to it. This is why a good practice, I'm sure you've heard it, learning to laugh at ourselves is a very good practice, a very good spiritual practice. And one of the reasons why the self, the I, seems so permanent has to do with language. Because if you have to speak a lot in one day, and you're using the I all the time, right? I. Because you're using the same label to communicate, it gives the impression in the mind, in consciousness, that the I is rock solid and everlasting. It is always there, isn't it? Even if things are happening around you, including, storms, tornadoes, you name it, snow, hot, the I is always there, right? It has to do with language, because you're using the same I all the time. But it's an illusion. And this is why when we trust awareness and the knowing, the Buddha nature, this is where the true wisdom is. Yeah, we don't have time to go into the elements, but it's on the video. And we mentioned that if you really want to know what continues after death, it's the elements. They go back to nature. Earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness. And space is considered an element because there's space inside the body and there's space outside the body. And without space, nothing could exist, including, countless galaxies. So there's a lot of space up there. It's quite amazing. And you find that when the mind is quiet, especially if you're in nature, the mind becomes more spacious. Have you noticed that? Spacious awareness. Because awareness by nature is spacious, right? But normally we don't experience the space because we're thinking too much, compulsive thinking. And thinking takes up all the space in the mind. So silence and space go together. I just do reading here. We believe that a self exists, that is a permanent, concrete, separate, and independent ego entity which sees, hears, smells, tastes, feels, and thinks. We believe that a self lives and dies. We believe that their other selves exist. This is the incorrect view of reality. What we take for self are only ever-changing phenomena. In reality, there's no I, no he, no she. These are just labels for social communication, just like our names. We spend our lives dreaming about things which do not exist. Our wrong view causes us attachment and suffering. We have expectations of ourselves and others And if these expectations do not come through, we suffer from frustration, disappointment, resentment, and so on. We are afraid of death, and we do not know what happens to the self after we have died. It would be most beneficial if we could see our life as it really is, only changing phenomena. Then we can face with right understanding sickness, aging, and death. All phenomena in ourselves and around us have two types of reality, physical and mental, as I explained. And this includes animals, birds, and insects. So even dogs and cats are also, rupanama, mental, physical, and mental phenomena. Even an ant, physical and mental phenomena. And what is interesting is that when there's a death, we tend to say somebody has died or somebody has passed away, right? That's our social convention, social language. But a deeper reality, there is no self, no person who has died or passed away, but rather it's the physical, mental process simply shut down. In other words, it stopped working. The process simply shuts down. And on the level of the 5 factors of experience, which we just explained, these 5 things, they just stop working. It's very profound. Very profound. And also, there's no self that is born. We were never born. I mentioned this briefly. And yet we celebrate birthdays. But it's a part of our social conditioning. But the truth is, young babies don't have a self. The idea of self and birthdays and age is something that is slowly conditioned in the mind of a child. As the child gets older and older, you begin to see that. It's really social conditioning. So that's how we find a cure for birth. And when we have this wisdom, we're no longer attached to birthdays. You can celebrate birthdays, but don't have too many expectations. Because you know what happened when your birthday is coming up, right? All these expectations. And if your partner or your close friends forget your birthday, what happens? Big drama. And you begin to see too that age is only a number. When you have wisdom, you realize age is not a number. You know the saying, you're as old or as young as you feel. It's really true. And the wonderful thing about the stillness and meditation, you're in touch with the timeless dimension of the universe. Because the universe is timeless. No beginning, no ending, always was, always will be. So the Big Bang is only a theory. It's funny because one of the arguments for God is that there must be a beginning to the universe. And if there's a beginning, there's a cause. And the cause, of course, is God. But that's the wonderful thing about meditation. That you go beyond all that stuff. You're no longer confused. And you realize we're aspects of the universe in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself, experiencing itself. And it's all elements, and at a deeper state we have atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy, because everything is composed of atoms. And as you know, the first law of science, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. So on that profound level of reflection, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. That's right. And one interesting thing about atoms is that every day we take in atoms, we expel atoms, don't we? So the atoms that are in our bodies at this very moment, they have been recycled many, many, many times. So it's possible that there are a few atoms in our bodies that were once in the bodies of dinosaurs. Just reflect on that. We're sharing the same atoms. And because we're 70% water, a lot of our atoms in our bodies at this moment were recently in the sky as water vapor, clouds, rain, and snow. Houston finally got snow. And if you've never left Texas, never left, it's interesting to know that all the atoms in our bodies have been around the planet many, many times, according to the weather patterns. And they didn't need flight tickets or passport. Just think about it. And one more interesting fact. It's possible that there's one atom in our bodies at this moment who was once in the body of somebody very famous or well-known long, long time ago. Just reflect on that. Okay, at this time, are there any questions? Any questions? Oh, by the way, don't believe a word I've said. Don't accept anything I've said. Yes.
Thank you for today. But you said that the universe is forever will be, has always been, and forever will be. Does that imply it's permanent?
Even the word permanent does not exist. But it is something that you can only experience through meditation. And it helps if you can see the Milky Way galaxy and you spend time. Have you ever done it? And it's good to lie down so that you don't strain your neck. I was able to do that several consecutive nights, sleeping out on the beach in the Mediterranean. But that's another story. But it's wonderful because when you first see the Milky Way, it appears as a two-dimensional object initially. But then, when you relax your mind and your awareness begins to expand, you begin to experience the three-dimensional reality of the galaxy. And you realize that we're inside it. And speaking of space, by human scale, the solar system is a vast place, right? Think of the solar system is so vast by human scale. And yet it is like a speck of dust inside the Milky Way galaxy. That's right. So it's nice to look at photos of galaxies, but it's good to be outside too. And get away from internet, get away from your phone, and really expand your mind. But you see, if you're trapped in dualistic thinking, which most people are, including scientists, cosmologists, they will always be talking about the Big Bang or the Big Crunch. You ever heard about the Big Crunch? Yeah? because they're trapped in duality, beginning, ending. And with God, the idea of creator God and creation, right? You have creation, you must have the creator. Because my mind was also trapped in that. I was a former Christian. But once you go beyond that, wow, you're free of that duality. Thinking is very limited. But consciousness, you expand your mind. Yeah. And to realize we're a part of it, and it's a wonderful mystery. You begin to appreciate the mystery of life itself, of existence and consciousness. And the only thing that makes any sense in all this mystery is loving kindness and compassion. That's right. Only qualities. Yes.
I watched a documentary last night about Buddha. When before 2011, he was able to see the past life, become organ animals, human. Is that a part of the conscious?
These are just ideas. Because I know when I'm in Asia, people ask me about, the 31 planes of existence. And I said to them, I grew up in Jamaica, West Indies, so I didn't have all that conditioning. Let's just say they're ideas. They're just ideas. Yeah. But I know there are some people who really believe in it. And I said, okay, go ahead, believe in it. But practice some mindfulness. That's the important thing. Because it's very hard, especially if you're conditioned with certain beliefs. And people around you have the same beliefs. And they give you some comfort, some sense of security, some confidence, although you're not really sure. It's very hard to let go of it. So I always say, people, believe anything you want to believe. But mindfulness and awareness is the most important thing to deal with suffering. The truth of suffering and the ending of suffering. That's right. I know many people believe in rebirth, right? I like to say regarding rebirth and reincarnation that in my previous life I used to believe those things, but in this life I don't. It was meant to be a joke. Because if you don't see the joke, it's like, oh my God, what kind of Buddhist monk are you? It was meant to be a joke. Because when I first began to teach in Malaysia, Singapore, and most of the Buddhists there are Chinese, ethnic Chinese. And they were very obsessed with the idea of past karma and rebirth. And every time I try to explain my understanding, they either got more confused or they get very upset. And I always remind them, it is only my understanding. You don't have to accept it. For example, when they had the Indian Ocean tsunami, 2004, Boxing Day. Yes, I remember that clearly. What did the Christians say? God was punishing the sinners. The Muslims said Allah was punishing the non-believers. And the rest of Asia, past karma. People did bad things in their previous life, and now they're suffering because of the tsunami. Yeah, they're being punished by the tsunami. So I have to remind them that natural forces have nothing to do with karma. The forces in nature have nothing to do with karma. Karma is what you do. Your intentional actions. I'll tell you a quick story. There was once a young monk in the temple, and he was washing his teacher's teacup. And this teacup was the teacher's favorite teacup. And the student was in a hurry, or he wasn't being mindful. The cup slipped from his hand, fell on the floor, and broke into several pieces. Have you heard the story? Then he started to worry, oh my God, Master's going to be so angry and broken his favorite teacup. What to do? And then he heard the teacher coming. Ayo, what to do? So scared. He quickly picked up the broken piece and he hid it behind his back. So worried. And the teacher came. And in his heightened state of anxiety and his worry, he suddenly got an inspiration. He said, teacher, can you tell me again, why do people have to die? Teacher said, well, we have to die simply because we are born with this physical body. And because we have the physical body, we have to experience all the natural conditions of the body. Because the truth is this body does not belong to us. It belongs to the natural changing conditions of nature. There's hunger, tiredness, sickness, aging, and death. It's just the nature of the body. And so we have so long to live, and then there's a time for us to die. The student gave a big smile, produced the broken pieces. I'm very sorry, teacher, but it was time for your teacup to die. Okay, any more questions? We still have time for one or two questions.
We'll go ahead and wrap it up then. If you'll please stand. We'll end with 3 bows to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. And 1 bow for Bhante.